It was an early April morning in 2013. At the bridge over the Yenisei River on the border of the Siberian regions Khakassia and Krasnoyarsk, a young woman knocked on the window of a gas station checkout. At this time of year, the mornings were still frosty, but the woman was dressed only in a t-shirt and jeans. The gas station attendant let her in. The woman was shaking from the cold and could hardly speak. On her swollen neck, bruises resembling the shape of fingers were becoming visible. The attendant gave her a warm shirt, some valerian tincture to calm her down, and called the police. Half an hour later, the police arrived. In a hoarse voice, barely over a whisper, the woman managed to recount what had happened to her. The 18-year-old Angelina, the name has been changed, was returning late after meeting up with her friends when an old blue car of the Russian brand Izh-Oda blocked her way. The driver, a heavyset dark-haired man, lowered his window and shouted something to Angelina. When she didn't stop, he quickly got out of the car, ran up to her, grabbed her hand, and said that he would kill her if she didn't get into the car. It was way past midnight, not a soul out on the streets. Frightened, Angelina obeyed. She got into the car and her attacker drove off. For several hours, he simply drove her around the city, sometimes making stops. During one of them, she tried to escape, but the door was blocked. The kidnapper said that he would break her neck if she tried that again. Then he brought her to a dacha village on the banks of the Yenisei River. The summer season had not yet begun, and the dachas were empty, with nobody to come to the woman's aid. The man didn't get out of the car, but turned off the engine and looked at Angelina, who was trying to covertly dial a friend's number in her pocket. The man noticed this, and with a swift movement, took her only means of communication. Then forcing her to undress, he raped her. After that, he grabbed Angelina by the chin and tried, as promised, to break her neck. That didn't work, so he resorted to trying to strangle her. Angelina didn't give up, and with her last ounce of strength, sharply jabbed her thumb into the rapist's eye, forcing him to let go for a second, which was enough for her to unlock the car door and escape, leaving her jacket and other belongings inside. All of this, Angelina told the police, who took her with them. She showed them the spot where it all happened. Her bag and jacket were left there. At the police station, she was interrogated and sent for a medical examination by investigator Olesya Kalinina. In the afternoon, a local cab driver with an Izh-Oda, the 27-year-old Dmitry Lebed, was brought in for questioning. He was interrogated by Anton Kandaurov, a younger investigator who refused to examine Angelina's belongings or send anything to forensics. To him, neither Angelina's things nor the seats of the cab were of any interest. The driver assured Kandaurov that the sex was consensual and that the woman simply forgot her jacket in the car, and so Dmitry was released. 10 days later, investigators Kalinina and Kandaurov called Angelina in. The conversation didn't go well.
They both laughed at me, asked why would I want to go through with this shameful thing. They said that I better take back my complaint, that I was drunk and I won't be able to prove anything, suggested arranging a conversation with Lebed. I was shocked by this approach and ended up doing what they asked, simply so as not to see them anymore, not to be bothered by anyone, not to see Lebed. This was why I wrote a statement that I have no complaints to make.
Dmitry Lebed, the cab driver whom the police let go that day, will go on raping young women for several years, killing 4 of them. On September 4th, 2012, a group of street sweepers from Abakan was mowing grass and picking up rubbish on the side of a country road when one of them found a black Samsung phone on the ground. Its battery lay nearby and had already rusted. The sweeper threw it out and took the phone, which had a foggy screen, to dry. A little later, Not far from the same place, he found a woman's handbag which contained a mirror in the shape of a chocolate bar, keys, makeup, and pills. 100 yards away, he found a pink bra, swimming trunks, and a wallet. All this went into the garbage bags. As for the phone, the sweeper took it with him and turned it on at home. The next day, criminal investigators arrived at his place. They had tracked the signal. The phone was registered with the missing 22-year-old student Anna Lashkova. Anna was reported as missing in the summer of 2012. On the night of June 20th, she was sitting with friends on a bench in front of the house 102 on Krylov Street. Anna had come to Abakan to discuss wedding preparations with her sister. At 2 o'clock in the morning, the group on the bench began to disperse while Anna stayed to wait for a taxi. Nobody saw her again. By a sad coincidence, the 26-year-old Dmitry Lebed was hanging around the neighboring house that evening. In May, his wife has kicked him out of the house and changed the locks, having grown tired of her husband's abuse and beatings. This was why, having nowhere to go, Lebed spent his nights in his car next to the house. After Anna Lashkova disappeared, a murder investigation was launched. The body was never found. The case was given to investigator Anton Kandaurov, the same one who a year later would formally interrogate Lebed and release him. Daria was 28 and a mother to 2 children when she was assaulted. One late March evening of 2014, she was returning home from a friend's place. She tried calling the cab company, but her phone died before she could give the address. So she decided to hail a taxi and was happy to soon see approaching a car with a checkered taxi sign. There was already one passenger in it, but the driver assured her that he would soon get off. Indeed, the first passenger soon left, and the driver continued in the direction of Daria's house. But he missed the required turn and instead quietly continued driving towards a wasteland outside the city, having locked the doors. When the car stopped, the driver tried to rape her, but she managed to unlock the door and run away into the field. Daria ran until she was exhausted. Seeing that her attacker had driven off, she wandered back to the road, trying to catch her breath. She was lucky. She managed to hitch a ride, and the driver helped her get home without asking questions. Back at home, her mother opened the door. Daria's children were already asleep. Desperate and longing to forget what had happened, she overdosed on pills in the hope of taking her own life. Tragedy was averted by her mother, who found her and helped her pump her stomach. The next day, Daria went to work and became sick there. When she started bleeding out of her mouth, her colleagues called an ambulance, and she confessed to the doctors that she had overdosed on pills after an attempted rape. In a hospital hall, the district police officer was waiting for her for immediate interrogation.
I said I feel ill and that I'm not ready to testify now, to which the officer said that he urgently needed to take me to the police.
Daria recalls. She had to comply. At the precinct, no one paid attention to her condition. She was interrogated, transferred from office to office.
I couldn't testify because I was constantly vomiting. Every minute I had to go out because I was sick. I said, "Could you call an ambulance? Because I can't. I feel ill. I can testify later, when I'm feeling better." To which they answered, "You'll go to the doctor once we're done interrogating you."
To this day, Daria suffers from gastric issues. The investigator assigned to Daria's case told her that he saw no point in opening a criminal investigation, seeing the fact that the victim remembered the face and appearance of her attacker, the color of his car, and most of the route was not enough evidence. For 2 hours, he argued that there was no corpus delicti in the actions of the taxi driver, that Daria would go through a lot of time-consuming trouble that will have been in vain. This case would now go anywhere. Daria believed this and tried to live on to forget what had happened. But it turned out to be difficult.
I became weepy. Still, from time to time, the whole thing plays out in my head. Now I'm afraid to get into cars at all, to take taxis. I try to take buses and not stay out late.
She wanted to see a psychotherapist, but she didn't have the money for a private one and was afraid that she might lose her job if she went to a state clinic. The 30-year-old Anastasia was assaulted by the cab driver right at her front door. She thinks that in her case, he chose the wrong victim. It was late June of 2014. Anastasia was returning home late from a restaurant, wearing a long dress and high heels. She stepped out of the taxi and had already opened the first door of her building when suddenly a man pressed her with all his weight against the second door. At first, she tried fighting. Later on, the police would find her broken nail extensions at the scene. But the perpetrator was stronger. She didn't call for help because she didn't believe anyone would come around. Instead, she decided to trick him.
I said to him, "Let me at least take off my heels. They're uncomfortable." He let go of my hands. I bent over to pick up a shoe and whammed him in the face.
She continued hitting him with the shoe until he ran away. She forever remembered his sack-like appearance and his eyes, brutish, inhuman. The next day, she returned to the cafe that she had visited the previous evening to have a look at the external surveillance footage. There, she found the car with the checkered taxi sign that she had been looking for. The owner of the cafe assured her that he would give the footage to the police, but nobody from the police ever arrived to pick it up. Sometime later, a female investigator named Evgenia Kasyan denied Anastasia a criminal case due to the fact that the unidentified man himself gave up on his illegal actions. Anastasia was shocked.
I was thinking, you yourself are a woman. You never know when you might get in the wrong taxi. Your children are growing up in the city. Maybe you're negligent about your work, but out of purely human point of view, why wrap up a case like that? Well, we all know what it led to.
It led to the string of attacks continuing. After several setbacks, the taxi driver came up with a trick. In February 2015, he drove by a round-the-clock store where he bought champagne and some disposable cups. This was when Yelizaveta got into his car. He offered her a drink from a cup, which he had laced with something. And when she fell unconscious, he took her out of town, beat and raped her. After that, as if nothing had happened, he took her to the requested address. The woman's fiancé memorized the license plates of the car and called the police. The driver was once again called to the police station and interrogated, and once again released. Yelizaveta was denied a criminal case by 3 investigators at once. On June 6, 2015, Natalia Yakova disappeared. The woman was married and had 2 children. Her remains were found in July of 2015 between the cities of Abakan and Askiz. At first, it was decided that the body belonged to a homeless woman, and she was buried as such. Only 2 years later would her remains be exhumed and turn out to have been the missing Natalia. Alas, today's story is permeated with such negligence of the local authorities. Viktor Kicheyev is a former police officer. He never investigated criminal cases, but says he knows how it's all done. On June 12, 2015, his daughter, the 20-year-old Anastasia Borgoyakova, went missing. The day before, she and her husband were hanging out in central Abakan with some friends. They went to the movies, had a few drinks in a bar, and after that they all went to dance at the Café Royal. Anastasia was wearing an elegant black dress with a pattern that changed color in the light. During the party, she had a quarrel with her husband. Early in the morning, together with a friend, Anastasia returned to the Dacha district where she lived with her family. The 2 women sat outside and drank some more beer. At about 7 in the morning, Anastasia's husband drove up to them. The couple quarreled again. In a fit of anger, Anastasia ran out to the road, hailed a car, and left. It was the last time she was seen alive. She left behind 2 children, 5 and 1.5 years old. She never left them alone for long, so when she didn't return home, her relatives immediately suspected something was wrong. Her father Viktor recounts not being able to sleep for 2.5 years after his daughter's disappearance. At first, He hoped the police would find her, but soon started his own search. There was a surveillance camera right next to the spot where Anastasia had hailed a cab. It would have filmed the car's license plate. However, no one had requested the footage, and by the time Victor started his search, it had already been deleted. Victor believes that in the end, it was him who did most of the work to find his daughter using his connections. I installed video cameras, retrieved call details, found out when the phone was last turned on. I did all the direction finding myself. Mostly, I worked on my daughter's case, but on the others too. By the others, Victor means other women who, like his daughter, had disappeared in Khakassia. The search operation launched by the police didn't bring any results. Anastasia's relatives turned to local clairvoyants and shamans, carefully examining any spot that they pointed to. They even applied to the popular Russian reality show Battle of the Psychics in the hope that its participants could give them clues, all to no avail. But Viktor Kicheyev refused to give up, looking into one version after another. He pressed a married couple that his daughter was acquainted with. She used to be in prostitution. He was a pimp, but quit the field. We thought it was their job, but it turned out not to be the case. Victor also suspected a group of Caucasians that lived in the area, but this version also proved to be untenable. In the end, he found his daughter on his own. She lay with her head right here. He points at the ground under an overgrown birch. This is where the remains were found. I recognize her by the skull, by the teeth, and by the dress. The bones had been dragged away by animals. We tried collecting them, but couldn't find all of them. Rabbits don't eat bones, but foxes do hunt around here. I had passed her by many times. How could it have been that I didn't find her before? I would say, dear, couldn't you have given me a sign? I drove by so many times. He repeats relentlessly. I had taken the right direction. I was only about 4 kilometers short of the place. I blame myself for not getting there earlier. I always told everyone that I would find her. Found her in the end. Some people in the city believe that Kicheyev went too far in his investigation and think that he should have left all the people involved in this case alone and not forced his help on them. Victor himself says he was simply performing his duty as a father and as a human. Already next month, in July of 2015, Lebed attacked again. The 28-year-old pregnant Maria passed out in his car after drinking beer from a bottle. That evening, she had quarreled with her husband and left the house, sat for a short time in a cafe, and started making her way back. In the parking lot, she saw a cab. The driver seemed like a simple and kind guy. He told her about himself, his wife, with whom he didn't get along well, about the 2 children he had, one of whom was disabled. He invited Maria to drive around the city and chat some more. She didn't want to go home, so she agreed to keep the sociable driver company.
I was sitting next to him in the front seat. In the meantime, we dropped off 4 passengers. We chatted all the way. Then I went off to pee in the bushes, and I think he laced the beer with something, because after I drank some more of it, I got knocked out. I don't remember anything at all.
When Maria came to, she found her seat leaned back and the driver trying to take her clothes off. She managed to push him away and run out onto the road. On the same day, she went to the police, and a few days later, her relatives found the driver themselves. However, the police refused to open a criminal case, saying, "You don't have any bruises or marks. You won't be able to prove anything." In March of 2016, the story repeated itself, this time with Evgenia, whom Lebed took to a secluded area and assaulted. She didn't remember the license plate number, but a few days later, she called a cab and saw her attacker in the driver's seat. This time, Evgenia's friend memorized the license plate, and she went to the police. However, the police ridiculed her, saying she probably didn't have enough money and offered sex as a way to pay for the ride. They pressured her into writing a statement saying she wasn't willing to press charges against Lebed, and the perpetrator, who had been taken into custody, was set free again. The 2nd of September, 2017, early morning, a young mother got up to feed her child. She looked out the window and saw a dark-haired woman at the bus stop looking at her phone. After putting the child back to sleep, the mother looked out of the window again. This time, the bus stop was empty. That lonely young woman was the 24-year-old Oksana Litvinova. Oksana moved to Abakan with her sister, the 18-year-old Anna. She found a job as a salesperson in a cell phone store. On the eve of her disappearance, Oksana was in a cafe with friends. They drank beer, danced in a bar, and had a quarrel at around 5 a.m., which was why her friends left by taxi, while Oksana was left alone at the bus stop. When Oksana didn't come home on Saturday morning, her relatives immediately realized that something had happened to her. She wasn't answering her phone. On September 3rd, Oksana's sister filed a missing persons report with the police, who gave an odd answer saying something along the lines of, "If you file this report, it will affect your sister's career and she might not get a job." The sister's mother went to the investigative committee, but even there, they were reluctant to listen to the case. Only 2 days later, on September 5th, did the search for Oksana finally begin. Her body, covered with rotten grass, was found 3 weeks later in a forest a few miles away from Minosinsk in the Krasnoyarsk region. By that time, the whole of Abakan knew about her disappearance. Photos of the missing woman flooded social media, and volunteers in Abakan had launched a group to search for missing people. Users in social media recalled that this was already the 3rd woman to inexplicably disappear in Khakassia in recent years. Some suggested that there was a murderous psychopath raging in the city, but others urged them not to spread panic. Oksana's mother couldn't be present at the identification of her daughter, so she was identified by her younger sister, who recognized her manicure and clothing. The face was unrecognizable and it had been raining all month. It's important to note the role that Oksana's relatives played in this investigation. They would trace her route, tracked her last calls, and found the young mother in the window who was the last to see her. In late September, thanks to photographs of Oksana's jewelry sent to pawn shops, the police found her killer, Dmitry Lebed. The killer driver was detained on September 20th, 2017. He had pawned the woman's cross himself, but handed the rest of her gold jewelry, earrings, a chain, and a ring to his brothers, asking them to pawn them on his behalf. Lebed assured them that the jewelry had been dropped by his passengers. He also gave Yevgeny, the youngest brother, Oksana's bank card with a PIN code written on it. Realizing that there was no money on the card, Yevgeny Lebed threw it away in the city center. A passerby found the card and returned it to the girl's relatives. Receipts with passport information of the Lebed brothers were found in the pawn shops, as well as camera footage with their faces. In addition to that, the investigators used data from the Russian GPS alternative GLONASS to establish that the rapist's car had been in the same place where Oksana's body was found. Lebed's brothers didn't believe he was guilty. Dmitry would later write a letter from prison to his brother Yevgeny in which he claimed he had obtained the gold in the following way. Once, he was hailed by 2 hooded figures who asked him to drive to several different places, and when it was time to pay up, they couldn't find any cash and paid him on jewelry. The investigators arrested all 3 brothers on the same day. Yevgeny claimed that at the precinct, he was beaten and tasered. Both he and his brother Alexander later became witnesses in the case. Investigator Svetlana Odoreyko says that Dmitry Lebed had repeatedly pawned his victim's gold jewelry using his relatives' help. Another investigator, Glebov, looked into case denials that Lebed's victims had received from the police in the past several years. He eventually reached the case of Natalia Yakova, who was buried at the cemetery for the homeless. It was Glebov who had got her remains exhumed and DNA tested, finally setting the record straight. 6 women who survived the attack pointed to Lebed during police lineups. At first, Dmitry Lebed denied his involvement in murder and rape, and claimed during the first court hearing that he had given his confession under duress. Later on, he alleged that the women themselves made sexual advances towards him and consented to him taking them to the Mountain of Love, as one hill, popular among local lovebirds, is known in the area, where he treated them to chips, peanuts, and beer. As for his last victim, Oksana, he said she died in his car from an asthma attack. In the end, however, Lebed confessed to everything he was accused of and even turned down a lawyer. One of the investigators thinks that Dmitry started cooperating with the investigation in the hope of getting a reduced sentence of 10 to 15 years. Nonetheless, in April of 2019, Lebed was sentenced to life in prison. In court, he said he repented, but nobody believed him. As a child, Dmitry Lebed was often bullied by the kids in the neighborhood. Growing up, he was a calm, taciturn child who spent most of his time at home, helping his grandparents around the house. He didn't have any friends. At school, he was a good student, but reserved and disrespected by his classmates. He preferred socializing with the younger kids, but even they would occasionally beat him. Many of those who knew him described him using words like sack and wimp. While his grandmother, a school teacher, was still alive, it was mostly her who raised Lebed. He loved her very much, and his happiest days were when he lived with her. But that time didn't last long. Lebed's family moved to Khakassia from the Krasnoyarsk region when he was 8 years old, the eldest of 6 children. The mother of the family was so strict that she could force the children out in the cold for the smallest misdemeanor. These were the conditions in which Dmitry Lebed grew up. After graduating from school at 18, Lebed was conscripted and served as a driver of heavy vehicles with the Russian rocket forces. After returning, he worked first as a mechanic, then as a security guard and a loader. In 2010, he got married and started working as a cab driver because the job paid more. His wife was 5 years older than him. They had 2 children together. In 2012, she kicked him out of the house, filed for divorce, moved to another city, and got him deprived of parental rights. Lebed would later be sued for non-payment of alimony. During his criminal hearing, his wife was a witness for the prosecution. According to her, life with Lebed was full of scandals. He beat her, locked her on the balcony, smashed dishes in front of the children, threatened suicide, whereas the police did nothing when informed of this. After the divorce, Lebed stalked her, banging on her door at night, asking to be let in because he had nowhere to live. At that time, he was living in rented cars. His acquaintances said that he was very upset about the divorce. Lebed often changed cab companies and rented cars. One of the companies that he worked for between 2013 and 2015 fired him because of the repeated police checks in connection with accusations of harassment and theft. The dispatchers of the taxi companies where Lebed worked said during the trial that he often went off-route, stopping in deserted places for extended periods of time. During the trial, his former job partner remembered that Lebed would leave strange things in the car that they shared: lingerie, flip-flops, empty champagne bottles. In describing him, people often used the words cold, unemotional, taciturn. Investigators later told reporters that during interrogations he was composed, like a mummy. When confronted with his victims, he would not bat an eye, not a muscle moving on his face, his gaze inscrutable. Otherwise, however, Lebed wasn't a person to raise suspicion. The investigators said he looks naive, a little overweight, good-natured, with a sense of humor, tries to joke. Why were none of the girls afraid to get into his car? He didn't raise any suspicion at all, but at the same time, he's cunning. He can't hide that, always looking for his own benefit. He tries to find contact with a person to seem good, harmless, and kind. He's a manipulator. Lebed behaved cynically during the investigation. At one of the crime scene reenactments, to the question of where they should go next, Lebed said, "First, we need to go to Mount Samokhval." To which the investigator asked, "What should we check out there?" The answer shocked everyone. "I want to see the city from above." A psychiatric examination showed that Levitt is sane, but he has a tendency to achieve pleasure through violence. The investigators believed that he killed those women who resisted the most because he could not feel his power over them. However, for his relationships, he chose strong women.
I still love him. They call him Fat Scum. All sorts of names. He wasn't like that for me. His nickname was Panda, such a sofa bear, and his personality was like that as well.
Says the 42-year-old Stella Komisarova, Dmitry Levitt's former fiancée. Here's how she recalls the day of his arrest. In the morning, they were going to have breakfast together in a cafe, but Levitt said he had a short trip planned and left, promising to return in 15 minutes. It was the last time she saw him as a free man. She tried calling him, but couldn't get through, and was angry at him, suspecting he had gone to his ex. Komisarova became well known on all the online boards where Levitt's case was discussed. In the comments, she defended the person that everyone else wanted to see executed. Komisarova admits that her own father still refuses to talk to her. Komisarova, herself a taxi driver, met Levitt several years ago when her car broke down. Their occasional meetings developed into a relationship, but Komisarova soon found out that Levitt had another woman, 11 years older than him, and with children. Stella told him to make a choice, and during the New Year holidays in 2017, Levitt moved in with her. It turned out later, however, that he couldn't break off his previous relationship completely and dated both women up until his arrest. In the 2 years after his arrest, Komisarova spoke to Levitt only once. After the sentence was passed, she was allowed to a meeting with him.
After the encounter, I left in a terrible state, got into an accident, crashed another person's Mazda. Everyone told me not to go. I said, I want to look him in the eye. He wrote me a lot of letters saying that he loves me, that he's not guilty. Don't trust anyone, I'll get out and everything will be fine. I looked into his eyes and realized that he had done it. Out of those 3 hours, we probably spent about 2 hours just being silent. He sat crying. It was evident that he understood what he had done with his life, what he had done with my life.
Komisarova says she hasn't talked to any of the victims, but understands what they feel. She recalls that she herself was raped when she was 20 years old. A group of men dragged her into their car and held her in a garage for 3 days. Only recently did Komisarova take the engagement ring off her finger, and she still keeps Levitt's belongings at her place. None of the investigators who turned down the victims' request to open criminal cases received a prison sentence. Some of them left the investigation committee and chose another line of work. Others are still on the job. Every year, on January 1st, Viktor Kichev, the father of Anastasia Bargoyakova, gets up early, gets dressed, carefully chooses a bouquet, always in the same shop, and goes to the cemetery to celebrate with his daughter. It's her birthday. She's my New Year girl, he explains. For a long time, Viktor stands in front of the grave, quietly talking to his daughter, telling her the latest news, assuring her that she's remembered and much missed, and asking her not to worry about the kids. They're fed, dressed, and shod. Thank you for watching today's video. Subscribe to my channel not to miss any of my new videos. Stay safe.